Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by my two trusty co-hosts, Krista Dorides and Marissa Di Natale. Hi, guys.
Hey, Mark, you're wearing a tie.
I am.
What's that all about?
Under duress. Actually, all good. I had a conversation on AI and the macroeconomy with Michael Barr. Michael's on the FOMC, former vice chair of supervision at the Fed. And he's been writing a lot about AI and its impact. And so I had a really good discussion with him. But, I contemplated while I was getting dressed this morning, should I wear a tie, not wear a tie? Should I wear a tie? And you know what? I'm glad I wore a tie. I'm glad I wore a tie. Yeah.
You look
Do
sharp.
I? Okay. Very good. No hair,
Yeah.
but, a tie. Anyway. Um, and we got Dante. Dante, this is Jobs Thursday. Good to have you on board.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be
Yeah.
here.
You going to dig into the data for us? We'll do that in just a second because I want to bring in Alan Blinder. Hey, Alan.
Hello, how are you?
I am very well. And you? All good?
Yep, everything's
Of
fine.
course, everyone knows Alan. Alan is a professor of economics at Princeton. How long have you been a professor of economics at Princeton, Alan?
Around 100 years. Well, more than 50.
More than 50.
Actually.
You've seen a lot of business cycles, my friend.
Yeah, quite a
Quite a few business cycles. And we had you on, it feels like a long time ago, but it was a year ago, and you had just published a book on the monetary and fiscal history of the U.S. from, I think it was 1961 to 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Covering quite a few business cycles.
Yeah, yes, indeed. How's the book doing? How did the book do? Were you happy with it?
You have to grade these things for what they are. If this was a trade book, which it was not, it would be horrible.
Right.
But for a scholarly book, which is what it was meant to be, quite well.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. It's a great book.
It's a low bar, scholarly books don't sell that many copies.
Right.
But
Right.
by that standard, it's almost a bestseller.
That's fantastic. Well deserved. And of course, you were vice chair of the Fed back during the last technological revolution, right? That was the internet boom.
Yep, at the beginning of it.
Right? And I think it's fair to say you may have engineered or been on the Fed that engineered the only soft landing I can actually ever remember.
Yeah, depends how tough you want to be as a grader, but it's often, I think it goes down in history so far as the only perfect soft landing.
Perfect soft landing in the 1990s. And you were in the Council of Economic Advisors under Bill Clinton. So that I know that's going back.
Yeah, before the Fed.
Yeah. Well, it's so good to have you back on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
A lot to talk about. Before we get to all that good stuff, this is a big day for economists with the government reopening. We are now getting data, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the September jobs numbers. And I'll have to tell you, I don't know how you feel, but I was going through what I might call data withdrawal. I was having a real kind of existential problem. Although it's liberating in one sense. I might have said this before in the podcast. With no data, you can make stuff up. It's pretty easy to make stuff up. No problem.
Well, I think that's the administration's basic idea.
All right, there you go. I didn't say it. You said it, Alan. I didn't say that.
No, I said it. I will say it again. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's turn to Dante. Dante is our jobs maven. And Dante, make it good. What's going on with these job numbers? I was a little surprised. The top line was a little surprising.
Yeah, I was a little surprised as well. Obviously, I think the top line gain was 119,000. That's certainly higher than we were expecting, higher than consensus expectations. It doesn't do a whole lot to sort of wipe out the pretty poor performance in the 4 months leading up to September, but certainly a little bit of an upside surprise. Still a huge amount of concentration on an industry basis. Half of that top line gain was in healthcare, which is not surprising given what we've seen over the last 2 years, really. And then you had leisure, hospitality, government, construction, sort of as the other main supports there that accounted for almost all of top line growth. That story really hasn't changed. That job growth is still fairly weak, and it's still fairly concentrated in just a couple of industries. If you look at revisions to prior months, obviously those revisions are now pretty old at this point, but you got a down revision in August that turned that headline gain negative. So now we have two negative top line prints this year in June and August. As I alluded to, if you look between May and August, right, that 4 month period, job growth averaged less than 20,000 a month in that 4 month period. So, September was, I think, a nice surprise, but it doesn't do a whole lot to offset that, sort of really weak period of growth that we had for 4 months. I don't think it, sort of buffers us against continued slowing in job growth moving forward. I think particularly for October, I'm expecting pretty downbeat number. We should see a lot of those federal government workers rolling off of payrolls in October, and so I think we're probably headed for a much weaker October number than we saw in September.
Hey, Dante, in my mind's eye, it feels like because I haven't had a chance to really look at this data today because I've been running around DC, but it feels like the economy hasn't created many, if any, jobs since April of this year. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
That's
right. I
right.
mean, you're looking at an average that's well south of 50,000 a month, probably south of 30,000 a month since
Yeah.
April. It's a pretty weak
Okay.
average.
And I pick April because that was so-called Liberation Day, right? When the reciprocal tariffs were put into place and created a lot of drama and up and down and all around and uncertainty. Would you would you feel comfortable connecting the dots there between what's going on with jobs? Because if you look at the sectors that are losing jobs, those are the ones that you would expect to get hurt by tariffs, right? Right? Trade and transportation and manufacturing. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair if you look at the industry composition, right? Manufacturing's lost jobs for several months in a row. Transportation warehousing was the biggest loser in September, even though the top line number was more favorable. We lost, about 25,000 jobs in transportation warehousing, and it's been down over the last several months as well. So, I mean, it certainly feels like there's a link there between what's going on with trade and the job market.
Got it. Given the 119K gain, has because it was on the high side of was well above expectations, I think, which was 50K and higher than our expectation. Has your view of the job market changed at all? I mean, if it's soft. Is your view that it's still soft?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
my view hasn't
Okay.
changed because of this one
Right.
report, right? Especially given that it's basically 2 months old at this point. I mean, I think we'll hopefully learn a little bit more when we get September and October data here in a couple of weeks.
Right. Well, we're not getting. Are we getting in a couple of weeks?
Or October and November data. Well, mid-December,
Mid-December,
so I
like
mean,
oh,
it's a
yeah, you're
little
right.
less than a
Yeah,
month
it's a
away.
little
Yeah.
less than a month away. Okay, and what about the household survey data, which we won't get, for the month of October, but what the unemployment rate is now 4.4%, creeping higher. What do you make of that?
I mean, just a lot of volatility on the household survey side of things. We saw the labor force grow by a significant margin again, which obviously is very different from what we saw earlier in the year. So really, over the last 2 months, that's what's been pushing the unemployment rate a little bit higher, which is sort of opposite of what we had seen in the first half of the year, where labor force was basically flat, and so it was helping keep the unemployment rate sort of steady. Um, you've got big swings in both the labor force and household survey employment. So I think it's hard to read into it too much. Household survey employment is up by over 500,000 over the last 2 months, but it's still down over the course of the year since January. So you had some big downward swings in the first half of the year, and now you're getting some rebound from that. But I don't think it's sending a strong signal by any means. I think it's just volatility on a month to month
And one
basis.
more question before I get bring Alan back into the conversation. 4.4, would you consider that to be above full employment, or we're splitting hairs here at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in the neighborhood of full
Right.
employment. I don't think I would argue strongly one way or the
Right.
other.
Okay, got it. Hey, Alan, what do you make of all this? What's going on in the job market, specifically, and then the economy more broadly? It's just a very open-ended question. How are you feeling about things?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised by the employment report, as you guys were, as seemingly everybody was. I mean, if you remember, excuse me, if you remember how things looked when the data lights went out, I don't want to say it was grim, but everything was sort of pointing in a not so great direction uh, about the labor market, uh, both on the supply side, where there was constrictions from the immigration policy, if you want to call it that, and on the demand side. And there was a growing belief that we weren't going to see monthly numbers over 100,000. That was going to be rare now. The norm was more like 50ish. And relative to that, this was quite a surprise, I think. Now, I do agree with what Dante said. I must have said a million times that I don't make much out of one monthly tick for the reasons he said. But we we watch them. It would be better if we had three.
Right.
That's when I stop paying attention. If you get three in a row that are telling you something that's almost the same thing, I start believing it.
Got it. Got it. So you're well, you'll take it. Yeah, this is good, but it's still early,
Yeah.
too early to conclude that we're the job market's getting any of its legs back. That it's still
Yeah. Conclude would be much too
yeah,
strong. Yeah.
right. Okay. And about the economy more broadly, Alan, how do you feel? I mean, this maybe I'll frame it
Well,
this way. At the start of the year, really when President Trump was elected and started implementing his tariff and immigration policy, I thought this year would be a much weaker year. And it ended up so at least so far, job market aside, I mean, certainly if you look at GDP, it feels like it's ending up to be kind of better than anticipated, at least what I thought. Is that kind of sort of your perspective as well?
yes, I have the advantage, Mark. Unlike you, I'm not a numerical forecaster, so nobody could go back and say what number
Right.
was I posting in January. But if I was, I'll confess, I would have been too high. I would have been too
Too
low.
low.
That the economy has done uh, better. I think the tariff shock has had a smaller effect on the economy than many of us thought. Not zero, but a smaller effect.
Mhm.
There are probably many reasons for that, not the least of which is the on and off nature of the president's proclamations. Like one week, the tariff on China is going to be 145%. The next week, it'll be, well, 15 for the moment or something, and then it'll go back to 100 or something. And many other cases like that you're familiar with. But the ones I think you probably want to come back to this later. Would point out that a great deal of this growth is investment in AI, and maybe too much. That it's not. What do we really know? It's not even. It's very uneven. Is it too much? We'll probably know the answer to that in 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
I suspect that it's too much, but we can come back to that. But that's one. I would just want to bring it up here. That's certainly one of the reasons, and maybe the biggest reason why GDP growth has been higher this year than we thought in January.
Right. So two reasons you called out. One is AI and the investment spending related to data centers and the electric power and chips and everything else that go along with it. And the other is
Right.
perhaps the pass through of the tariffs to consumers may have been so at least so far less pronounced just because the stated tariffs are all over the map and businesses just don't know where they're going to land, and as a result, they're gun shy in passing through, at least to the
That's right. That's what I've said to a number of you. If you're running a business and you don't know if your tariff rate by the time it gets to consumers is going to be 10%, 15%, 80%, you may just hang in there.
right, right,
There's an irony there, Mark, because many of us were pointing out, and I know I was guilty of this, the real side of that, that when you create this pervasive uncertainty, people are likely to pull back and not invest and not promote their products as much as they otherwise would,
right.
and so on. But the nominal side of this goes the other way. And I think that in retrospect, I wouldn't have, don't think I'm such a genius. I could have told you this in January. I couldn't. But in retrospect, it looks like the nominal side effects of the pervasive uncertainty have been dominant.
Oh, I see. Interesting. And on AI, you mentioned the investment spending. What about the surge in equity prices for these AI companies and the resulting potential wealth effects, for consumers, well, the well-to-do that own the stocks. Do you think that's been a big part of what's going on too?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Although it's very, I don't know to tell you, it's very concentrated in wealthy households whose marginal propensity to consume out of wealth is probably not that high. Nonetheless, the amount of new wealth has been enormous, and some of it has been spent. I believe the data. You watch this closer than I do. I believe the data are showing that an unusually large part of the increase in consumer spending is coming from upper income
Yeah.
households, and they've enjoyed tremendous capital gains, which in turn have been concentrated in the so-called Magnificent uh, Seven. I saw a chart the other day. You probably see these 12 times a day, showing the Magnificent Seven against the other 493, and it's very dramatic.
Very dramatic. Yeah. Both in terms of stock prices and investment. I mean, I think if you do the arithmetic, the Magnificent Seven, or maybe expand it a little bit to include like the Palantirs of the world and those kinds of things. So it's say a dozen AI companies, over 90% of the capital spending that and R&D investment that's been done since ChatGPT back in November of 2022 has been by those companies, which means only 10% of the CapEx is by everybody else. And that kind of gives you
Yeah, it's amazing.
pretty amazing. Look,
It's amazing and a little bit worrisome, I think.
yeah. Yeah, Chris, on this topic of this year turning out to be better than anticipated, same with you. Has it turned out to be better than you would have thought at the beginning of the year? And any other
Yeah.
reasons you would ascribe to that kind of outperformance relative to expectation? And by the way, I should say it's done better, but it hasn't done that great, right? I mean, even if Q3 GDP comes in at 4%, which it might, given movements in trade flows, year-over-year growth in GDP real is still 2%, right? Which is, not a bad year, but it's not a great year. But anyway, Chris, anything else? Do you agree with that? Did you have the same kind of forecast error, and what do you
Yeah,
describe it? Yeah,
same confession.
same
That,
confession.
economy's done much better. Certainly given the policies. Right. I guess I still have this in the back of my mind, though. I still think of the calm before the storm, that there's another shoe to drop here. The full effect of the tariffs has not been fully realized. So perhaps this year did a little bit better, but next year may do a little bit worse than anticipated as those full effects really come to the fore. Immigration policies really start to take an effect.
Right, right. Okay. So if we've established that with AI it's come on very dramatically here this year and has been a key part of the uh, better than anticipated performance of the economy, that does raise a question. And Alan, you've already alluded to this a bit already, whether what we're observing here is sustainable, both in terms of the actual investment that's going on, but also in terms of the run up in equity prices and the impacts that's having. You sound, at least to my ear, you sound very, uh, what's the word? Cynical or cautious, or you're questioning of whether that's going to continue here going forward.
Let me say two things that at first are going to sound contradictory, but they're not. One is I think AI is a very big deal, transformative in many, many ways, at least half of which we can't even come close to predicting now. Probably way more than half that we can't come close to predicting, but a big deal. And so when people talk about an AI revolution, I don't sneer at that idea. Second, however, and I hardly hear anybody ever mention this, it would be completely contrary to the history of capitalism if this was not a bubble. I tell people things like this. People were starting automobile companies in the 1890s and around 1905 and so on. That was a good idea. They were going to catch on, automobiles. Almost none of the companies that started back then still exist. Move up to radio, move up to computers. PCs are one of my favorite examples. When I bought my, get this, Radio Shack PC, remember Radio Shack?
You do.
In 1980, there were about 100 companies making personal computers. The only one of those that still exists is Apple. So if you invested in a beautifully structured mutual fund of PC companies in the year 1980, you lost your shirt, basically. If you invested in Apple, you did great. And it goes on and on. The history of capitalism is like that. So that's why I both think this is something real and transformative and important, and also a bubble.
Well, it's almost the case you can't have a bubble unless there's something real and transformative underneath, right? I mean, that it captures the imagination. And
Well, it could all be, it could all be excuse me, it could all be fantasy, but I'm talking about the ones that aren't.
yeah,
The PC was not a fantasy that was going to catch. Imagine if you told people in 1980, when I bought my TRS 80, that by pick a year, 2005, almost everybody would have a PC in their house.
yeah.
You'd have been thought crazy. I never would have said that. But it happened. It was real. Same with radios. I left out televisions.
So if it, and I think you used the word bubble, right? Did you use the word bubble? I think, or am I reading? Yeah,
Yeah.
you were use the word bubble. If it's a bubble, and again, you harken back to history, more often than not, bubbles burst, right? I mean, and so in your
At unpredictable times.
right. So it sounds like that you're saying in the most likely scenario here going forward, AI is, as you say, a big deal, and it's a game-changing technology, and it's going to have all kinds of uh, implications for the economy. But there is a very high probability, better than even odds, that at some point we're going to see some correction, some significant dislocation in the stock market, in the equity market.
Yeah, I think so. And also, I would add, it's implicit to what I said before. Some of those great looking companies now will go bust.
Right. Right.
That will look back from the perspective of 2035 and say, why in the world did people have such a belief in? I don't want to name a company because I don't know which it's going to be. It probably won't be NVIDIA because they're making the chips that everything runs on. But there are a lot of others, including even OpenAI. I mean, OpenAI may be the Apple of this cohort of firms, or it may not be. I have no idea.
Right. Now, of course, if you go back to the internet period, the period of the internet, and again, using history as a guide here, and of course, that ended with a bursting of the bubble. But if you go back prior to that, when you were at the Fed, and during the late '90s, after you had left, there was the same kind of hand wringing about the equity market. And I remember Greenspan
Yeah.
gave that famous speech back.
Yeah, that was 96.
Was it 96? Right. Irrational
Yeah.
exuberance speech.
I do remember.
And of course, the market.
I was on the Fed then.
Oh, were you?
Listening, and I said, did he really say that? And he did.
Yeah. And I guess the intent was to try to deflate the bubble or take a little steam out of the bubble. So that,
Uh-huh.
yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah, I think so.
And it worked.
Didn't work.
Didn't work. I mean, maybe briefly there was a little bit of a correction and then it was off and
Yeah.
running again.
Worked for a day.
But that was 1996, 97. The bubble didn't burst until 2000, 2001, really.
Yeah.
Right. So,
I teach about these things, and I show a slide in lecturing about that of Wile Coyote
yeah,
going off the cliff.
right.
And there he is out in air. And at some unpredictable moment, he looks down and goes right down to the earth.
Yeah,
And I do that to make the points that bubbles do burst, but when they burst is completely unpredictable.
right, right. I guess the other lesson from that period, the Y2K bubble and the bursting of the bubble, was the actual recession that ensued was pretty modest, right? Yeah.
Very.
I mean, in fact, I would even argue that if it hadn't been for 9/11, which was, September of 2001, there might not even been a recession. Where, right, the National Bureau of Economic Research might not have dated that period as a recession.
Yeah. I call it the recessionette.
Recessionette. Okay. Very good. So, and I guess my narrative there, and I'm curious what you think, and you probably said this a gazillion times, but it's in my own mind, I think it's my thought that was equity, not debt. So that was a big difference between. Okay.
Absolutely. I've written about this. I couldn't agree with you
Yeah.
more. Equity bubbles burst much more gently. It's concentrated on rich people that own the equity.
Right. And it doesn't
But
necessarily.
debt-fueled bubbles bring down banks, financial
Right.
institutions, and all kinds of things happen.
Right. So I guess in the current context, it feels like if the bubble were to burst today, it would feel more like the Y2K bubble bursting because it's more equity than debt.
I think
Yeah,
so.
but there's reason to be nervous, isn't there? Because it feels like increasingly the capital investment that's occurring among these companies is, private credit firms are getting involved and they're bringing leverage to
Yeah,
the deals.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reading. I don't have personal knowledge of this. I'm reading now and then about uh, even big tech firms borrowing a lot of money,
Right.
which was not what we were used to in the year 1999 and 2000. That was all equity finance. There was hardly any debt involved at all.
Right. Right. Well,
But still, your point is right. It's mostly equity.
mostly equity. Okay, so that it sounds a little ominous. It says, we have a Wile Coyote moment in our future,
I
near-term
think so.
future. The other thing I worry about is jobs. So here we are, the job market is soft. We're struggling to create jobs. Lots of reasons for that. There's supply issues because of the restrictive immigration policy and the foreign-born labor force is declining. Part of it is maybe AI is having some effects, but all of this is happening before AI is really, kicked in and generate significant productivity gains, right? And that feels like that's coming too. So couldn't it be another real threat here is that we start really seeing the productivity gains in 2026 and 2027, and that means actual, given where we are in the job market today, actual job loss. Does that sound?
Yes, yes, but also actual job gain.
You think on?
Come back to I was talking a moment ago about the broad history of capitalism. We've had many uh, technological revolutions that destroyed jobs, but also created
Right.
jobs. At least up to now, it's always created after some severe disruptions. I don't want to minimize this. I mean, the Luddites were smashing machines for reasons. They weren't just crazy people. Uh, so this can be a difficult and severe and maybe long-lasting adjustment. But the history suggests that more jobs will be created than destroyed.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying?
Eventually, I want to emphasize
Yeah.
that adverb.
Yeah. Eventually. Yeah. It could be the case. So the one concern would be that, and now I'm speaking, as a business person with a couple hundred economists around the world. We run a business, and it feels like there. And I look at my peers in the financial services industry. It feels like no one's firing anybody, but no one's hiring anybody. Headcounts are going
Yeah.
down, and that's before AI has really kicked into any kind of gear in terms of productivity gains. I mean, everyone's talking about productivity gains, and we're all trying, but it doesn't feel like there's some game-changing, productivity-enhancing thing. But if that actually happens, it feels like that could result in some pretty big job loss before those job gains you're talking about actually come to fruition.
Yeah, it could be. But I think, well, I'm not sure about this, but I have a hunch that the sector you're talking about is among the most vulnerable to
Okay.
AI
Yep.
replacement. Um, uh, the leisure activities, medical care. Uh, I almost said college teaching, but I'm not so sure about that one. Uh,
Right.
are less vulnerable to replacement by AI. I mean, it'll vary a lot across sectors and across specific job types. But my hunch, Mark, is that the kinds of jobs you're talking about on Wall Street are among have high vulnerability rather than low
Yeah.
vulnerability
Makes a lot of
to
sense.
AI.
Yeah. Well, one other aspect of AI that, I worry about is its impact on the income and wealth distribution, the so-called K-shaped economy. And obviously, this has been a long running, problem, the skewing of the income and wealth distribution, but it feels like it's in hyperdrive, with AI. Is that on your
Yeah,
radar?
it does. But the question is, will it last? I mean, think about what we were just talking about.
Right.
We were talking about the potential destruction or at least end of growth of very high paying jobs. And, the gardeners and janitors and hotel staffs of the world are not going to be replaced. Not that they're doing great, uh, but the lower 25% of the employed labor force is probably not going to be impacted very much by AI. They have enough problems of, that we're familiar with, but I don't think AI ranks highly on that. But for people that work for hedge funds and investment banks and places like that, your clientele, I would guess, um, uh, the vulnerability looks a lot greater.
Before we move on, I want to talk about monetary policy, in the context of AI and some of the other things that are going on at the Fed. Marissa, maybe I'll bring you into the conversation. Anything here you want to add that we kind of missed on in the AI discussion? Uh, Anything at all?
I agree with Alan. I mean, I think that short-term pain in terms of job loss, but I think with any kind of technological disruption, you always have jobs created that we can't even imagine right now, right? We can't even envision what they might be. So I think in the long run, it's going to create a lot of jobs. And I would say that in terms of this sort of K-shaped economy that everyone's talking about and the income inequality, the you're right, the destruction of jobs, direct destruction of jobs from AI, I agree. It's going to be more white collar, tech, finance, professional service type jobs. I was talking to bankers a couple days ago. They're looking at what they're going to do with their headcount because they can do a lot of stuff now with AI that entry level, credit analysts would be hired to do, right? I think the replacement of more manual labor, that's going to be robotics. And I think we're a long way away from that. But that's something to think about for the very long-term future. I think in the near term, AI is going to replace high-paying jobs. It's going to be robotics that replaces some of the service jobs.
Let me make a distinction between the very near term and the longer run. So, like when I uh, think I'm worried about what's happening to the job market, it's not. You're right. Longer run, the economy will adjust and we'll create other jobs that we can't even imagine. And yeah, I think it'll all work out. And that's the lesson of history and technology. That's generally how it works. But it just feels like to me in the current AI boom that we could see in the very near term, meaning next year, or the year after, just pretty substantive productivity gains that happen so fast that the economy can't adjust or the job market can't adjust. And I wouldn't worry about that too much if we were creating 150,000 jobs a month on average. We're not, we can't because there's no labor supply. So we're very close to zero job growth, maybe slightly positive. And then and AI hasn't really played much of a role there. I think we can all agree. Maybe on the margin, there's some younger folks are having harder time finding jobs because of the effects of AI. But it's on the margin. What happens though, and is it a reasonable concern that we kick in that productivity growth goes from 1.5 to 2% to 2.5 to 3% in the next year or two, and then we get outright job loss. I'm having a hard time. Is that a reasonable scenario, Alan? And if so, I'm not. How does that work? I don't know how that plays out. I'm having a hard time getting my mind around it.
Well, your question, is it reasonable? I said at the beginning of this part of the conversation, I don't know what to make about AI,
Yeah,
and so I can't answer that. But is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible.
yeah.
Look, Mark, as you well know, you can go back over the productivity numbers of the United States since pick whatever you want, World War One, and there have been fluctuations of the magnitude that you just said. When I was just getting started in this profession, a gazillion years ago, uh, we were in a world of about 3% annualized productivity gains in the United States, and it lasted for several decades. And then it ended pretty abruptly. And then, as you were alluding to in the 90s with the internet and other technological advances, we got a surge of higher productivity growth again, which enabled that helped, by the way, the perfect soft landing because supply started growing faster than we thought, and so the demand was not out of line with the supply. So sure, some things like that could happen to productivity growth. But again, if you look back at the history, and with the important footnote, there's plenty of disruptions along the way because people have to change jobs and things like that. But if you look back at the history, those periods of high productivity growth, like, let's take from World War II to 1973, were not periods of high unemployment. There was periods of faster GDP growth. So the same people working, however many there were, let's make up a number, 100 million people working, were producing more stuff. And Americans, as is their wont, were buying it. I never bet against the American consumer spending money.
Yeah. I think we say never underestimate the hedonism of the American consumer.
Well, that
Yeah,
too.
too. Yeah. Okay. So just to summarize, there's really feel in the near term, kind of three scenarios here. And I think that's the way to handle this uncertainty around AI. I mean, because as you say, Alan, who knows? But the most likely scenario is kind of a more sanguine one where the diffusion, the adoption of the AI occurs in a way that it doesn't completely disrupt the labor market and become a problem for the business cycle. That we kind of, it diffuses, it helps productivity, but the rest of the economy is able to adjust. Demand for other things are created, and off we go. We're fine.
Can I put in an important footnote to
Yeah.
that? Think about what's happened to manufacturing employment over the last 4 decades. There's been a tremendous shrinkage that's caused a lot of angst. It's caused a lot of problems for a lot of people, but it hasn't made the national unemployment rate go up, up, up.
Right.
And we may be seeing things like that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Got it. And
Sorry, I
not
interrupted
at
you.
all. No, that makes sense. And then the alternative scenarios is the one I painted where the adoption rates are so fast and the productivity gain so strong that it starts generating job loss, and then there might be an issue. Obviously, there will be a fiscal and monetary response to that. So, but that's in the second scenario. And then the third, which seems to be your baseline, Alan, is that the real risk here in the near term is a correction in the kind of equity market because of valuation and what that implies for everything else. That's the real risk, the real threat.
Yep, and the sectoral, excuse me, disruptions that we've talked about.
Got it.
Those two.
Got it. Okay, well let's change the topic a little bit. Unless I'm sorry, guys, Chris, Marissa, Dante, you have anything else to add? No. Okay.
Can I ask a question,
Sure.
Alan?
Yeah.
If you've thought about what does this mean for education going, this rapid introduction of AI, how does this change how people are educated, what levels of education they get, what they're studying? I mean, do you have a view on that?
I do. I do and I don't. I don't have a solution, but I have a view. I'm a college teacher, and I'm thinking now about my course in the next semester of how in the world am I going to examine my students when they all know how to use ChatGPT and we don't have good software that you could put it through and say this was generated with ChatGPT. So I think the danger of rampant cheating, which is not a good way to learn. Instead of learning something, you can cheat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got good tools like ChatGPT and others, it sort of has a danger of tilting the balance strongly in the direction of cheating. So that's my current worry as I design. I can be a little more specific. The course I'm going to teach next term is on central banking, and it lends itself very strongly, and this is what I've done for years and years and years, to a final essay, which is a policy conundrum I give them. Make up, some often based in reality, some situation and ask them both politically and economically and any other way they think they should to address what ought to be done.
That sounds
Uh,
can I sign up for that class, Dylan? Uh,
you would do well.
And
You would
audit
do
it.
well. Uh,
That's a forecast, though, and
well,
I
I'd
promise
like
not
to
to
think
cheat. I would not cheat. I can assure you.
good. That's all we have is having the kids promise not to cheat.
Right.
But I'm now thinking I may have to go back to, a 12th grade, sit in the classroom with a pencil and paper and write
Yeah.
an answer,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which I don't want to do.
I'll have to tell you, Alan, just as a side note, the only thing, I don't really have nightmares. I sleep pretty well. The only time when I have nightmares is when I start thinking about those damn blue books.
Blue
For the
book.
tests.
Yeah, they're
Yeah, yeah,
Princeton's economics department for its undergraduate courses. I'm talking about a graduate course,
yeah.
but for its undergraduate courses has mandated everybody go back to that.
The blue
In-class
wow.
exams, write the answers in a blue book.
Wow. Wow.
And that's because of AI.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a case of technological regress
Right.
caused by AI.
Right. Right. Wow. Very cool. Well, obviously, a lot of unintended consequences of AI. All over the place. Well, let's talk about monetary policy. What the Fed's doing in the context of what's going on here. The debate now is, will the Fed continue to lower interest rates? I mean, it cut rates a couple times here, and the expectation in markets is that at least until maybe today's report, that they might cut in December when they meet, and a couple times next year. That might be changing here as we chat. But what's your sense of how the Fed is doing here in navigating all these cross currents? Do you feel like they're doing the right thing?
I think that they are, with the important caveat that it's hard to know what the right thing is right now. This is the kind, I talk to the press a lot about monetary policy, as you do. And at intervals over the past decades, and this is one of those for sure, I emphasize that there are certain times when, because of the macroeconomic conditions, you should expect tremendous disagreement on the FOMC because it's not clear what the right thing to do is. I'm not frankly sure if I was on the FOMC today, which I'd be favoring in December. I would probably be favoring a cut of 25 basis points, but not with great conviction. And if the FOMC is split on that question, that seems about right to me. They'll meet and they'll try to reach a consensus. My guess is it's about 50-50 for December right now, including today's employment report, but that's not very informative. That's like Wile Coyote, right? 50-50. I don't know. That's a fancy way of saying I don't know. And depending on what happens after that, including with AI and investment and things we've just been discussing, it's not obvious to me that there is going to be enthusiasm for much further rate cutting in 2026. On the other hand, if the economy looks like it's staggering a bit, there will be enthusiasm for that.
So
And let's not forget that we have Donald Trump on the sidelines bellowing this and that. And more importantly than that, putting people like Stephen Moran on the FOMC.
right. This goes to the question of Federal Reserve Board independence, and
Yeah.
the one thing that has struck me is how seemingly indifferent everyone is to this. I mean, investors have not
Yeah.
responded. There's no, maybe
Yeah.
they have, and I just haven't observed it, but I don't even hear.
No, they're way under responded.
Right. So, how big
This
is,
is a rampant. This is a great contradiction to Blinder's law of speculative markets, which you may have heard me say before,
no.
which is that I've written and said this, that the markets generally get the direction right and exaggerate the magnitude by a factor between 3 and 10.
Ah,
That's Blinder's law.
that's a good one.
It's grossly violated. This is one of the biggest underreactions of the financial markets that I've ever seen in my life. I think this is a very big deal. Central bank independence under threat.
Right. And I mean, there's some clear examples that the Fed's independence is already under pressure, right? You brought up
Yeah,
the fact, and no comment on Stephen Moran. I'm not commenting on that, but the fact that he was
I will, but never mind.
chair of Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump, and now on the FOMC. Does that smack of loss of independence, that move, or
It
not?
does the way he did it.
The way he
It
did
does the way he did it. He's still on leave as chair of the Council of
Right.
Economic Advisors.
right.
That's outrageous. I made the transition from the CEA to the Fed,
Right.
but it was sharp. I mean, until I severed everything with the White House, they wouldn't let me in the building at the Fed. It was completely sharp. The idea that you wear both hats at the same time is crazy, I think, and is a violation of Fed independence. And then there's the Lisa Cook case is heading for the Supreme Court. If she loses, that's another violation of Federal Reserve independence,
just
a
to-
serious one.
Just if you're under a rock and you don't know what's going on there, so the President Trump wants to remove her from the FOMC because of some issues around her mortgage loans, whether she provided the appropriate information. Oh, that's an open question. I don't know whether
Right.
that's the legal question that they're debating. But you're pointing out that the fact that he's doing that is a sign of his efforts to impair the independence of the Federal Reserve.
It's never been done before.
Right.
No president has ever tried to remove a governor of the Federal Reserve.
Right. Right. I guess maybe the catalyst for markets waking up and investors saying, "Hey, we got a problem," is the president now needs to nominate a new chairman for the Fed, right? Because Chair Powell rolls off in May, and I guess the nomination process will begin here relatively soon, and maybe markets are waiting to see who the president nominates, because that might go a long way to giving them a sense of how impaired the Fed will be.
Could be.
It could be.
You have to be pretty optimistic to think it'll be somebody good.
Okay.
You know that the interview that person gets from the president, if he or she gets an
Yeah.
interview at all,
Right.
from the president, will basically have one question, and it will be, "Will you do what I say?"
Yeah. Right.
We all know that.
Right. Right. So just to spell it out for everyone, if the Fed loses its independence, or its independence is severely impaired, what's the worry here? What's and I'll preface this by saying, I was at a dinner with a bunch of CEOs, and the CEOs of these different types of companies expressed the collective view. Not everyone was involved in the conversation, but the general consensus view was, look, the president is the CEO of the country. He should be able to set monetary policy. That you need all the levers and tools that you can muster to be able to manage the economy and operate the ship. What's wrong with that perspective?
Wrong with that is that politicians. Let's just leave Donald Trump aside for a second and speak generically. Politicians generically have short time horizons, limited, not only short, but dictated by the electoral cycle. So short is one thing, and that's not good for monetary policy. but the electoral cycle every 4 years or every 2 years and then every 4 years does not correspond to the business cycle. And if you're dominated by the electoral cycle, not the business cycle, you're likely to do the wrong thing. And it's not going to be just wrong randomly. It's wrong too loose. And if it's wrong too loose, that's a recipe for inflation. I'm going to give you, here's a quiz question for you, Mark. You might get this right. Most people wouldn't get this right. When's the last time fiscal policy was used to rein in aggregate demand because of worries about inflation in the United States?
Oh my goodness. Probably Kennedy.
I know.
Was it Kennedy? No.
Oh, you're almost, yeah, it was Johnson,
Johnson.
1968. You were very close. 1968.
1968. Wow. Great point.
It's not going to be used. The politicians don't use their aggregate demand control weapon for that purpose.
Right.
They don't.
Right. So the concern here is that with a impaired Fed, the predisposition is too low for too long, which means inflation is ultimately the issue here. And that, and in your book, actually, you write, I think, quite a bit about Nixon, Arthur Burns. Arthur Burns was the chair at the time, and he was captured by, and we know this from the Nixon tape, so it's just on tape, so there's no debate here. And that obviously was back in the early 70s, and that was this a very inopportune time because inflationary pressures were already developing, and they took off at that point. Right.
Correct.
Right.
That's the best example in the United States of what happens when you lose central bank independence. You go to other countries in the world and you see more dramatic examples than that.
Well, is this your Wile E. Coyote moment? It sounds, you sound pretty pessimistic in this regard. That this is.
Yeah, I'm screaming about it at every turn.
Yeah.
I have a column coming out in the Wall Street Journal whenever my turn comes up. I've had it before, and I'm doing it again on this. It's a very big deal.
Very big deal. Yeah. But so, oh, go ahead, Chris.
Let me just say, when I say a very big deal, think about this, Mark. If he succeeds, and who's to say he won't because of the Supreme Court, in removing Lisa Cook from office, the new regime is the president can remove any Fed governor from office anytime he wants. That will be our new national policy. That's a horrible thought.
Yeah. Chris, you were going to say something?
Yeah. So does it come down to the bond vigilantes? Is that the
where are
recourse
they?
Here?
Yeah, where are they? They should be worried. And that's why I brought up Blinder's law of speculative markets. They should be overreacting to this risk, and they're way underreacting, I think.
When do you expect they would wake up, or what event would trigger them to start to?
I don't know. It may be an adverse ruling. The Lisa Cook, Trump versus Cook, is coming up in the Supreme Court in late January. And depending on how the justices sound in questioning the two sides, if they sound like they're going to find for Trump, which they typically do, that could be the moment of panic. I don't know. It's really a Wile E. Coyote. You asked me when will Wile E. Coyote fall to earth?
Right. All right. Well, that's sobering. It almost feels inevitable, right? I mean, the way things are going.
Well, it's not inevitable if the Supreme Court finds the right way.
I see.
I should truth in talking disclosure. I've signed an amicus brief. There are many. I signed one of them, pushing them in the right direction.
But even if the Supreme Court,
they may find in the right direction. That would be very helpful.
But even then, in that case, I mean, over time, the Federal Reserve, because as you said, in your narrative, whoever is now appointed to the Fed is going to have to swear to follow whatever the president wants them
Yeah,
to do, and
absolutely. I'm
it's just
worried.
a matter of time then, right? It's inevitable. It feels like. No?
Well, it's a race for time. It depends on when governors and bank presidents resign. And in the case of governors, can Trump get his nominations through? You may remember in Trump 1, I won't name names, uh, there were several names broached that were basically rejected by the Senate. He was going too far. Now, the current Senate and the Senate then look like two different animals to me, so I wouldn't bet a lot on that. But so yes, it's mostly a matter of time. And no, I was speaking about it's the matter of time. By the time we get there, the Trump administration will have about 2 years or so left to go. And now I'm letting my partisan proclivities show, but you know what they are anyway. He may be a lame duck by then because of the midterms in 2026. We can't know that now, but
Right.
if you were going to bet which side of the coin it's going to fall, you would now bet on the Republicans losing the House. And that'll make a huge difference. He'll still be president. He can still do things, and he has the appointment powers. He'll still have that.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like the Lisa Cook case is like really critical here. Then maybe that's the Wile
I
Coyote
think so.
amendment. Yeah, that might be the Wile Coyote amendment. Okay. All right. Well, we've kept you almost an hour, Alan, and I do want to end by asking another. I started with an open-ended question. I want to end with an open question, and I hesitate to do this because I have to say this conversation has brought me down a little bit. I'm just saying.
Just a little.
In fact, I think we're going to call it the Wile Coyote podcast, something like that. But what else out there, or if anything is out there that is kind of bothering you on your radar screen, you're kind of concerned or worried about? Is there anything else out there that?
Yeah, yeah, many things,
Many
but
things.
in the context
I
that you're
told you
asking
you're
the
going to bring me
question,
down. Go ahead. All right, fire away.
well, what I'll gracefully call, but should have a much less graceful name, our immigration policy. We are doing things on the streets of America that are completely, when I say we, our country, the force of the federal government, completely unconscionable, horrible. Nothing I ever thought I would see in my lifetime. Masked men without identification, either on themselves or in their vehicles, are grabbing people off the streets, some of whom turn out to be American citizens. They don't seem to care about that. And from the purely economic perspective, so the moral perspective is much more important. But from the purely economic perspective, this is now causing and will continue to cause even more shortages of labor in the kinds of things that immigrants do: construction, farm work, hotels and restaurants. The last one I saw last night on TV is a car wash they raided someplace in, forgetting what state now, Ohio maybe? It doesn't matter which state it was. They grabbed the people working in a car wash. And it goes on and on. I mean, this does not look at all like we're being very carefully selective in going after criminals that shouldn't be in the country. And if they are, they should be in jail. And we should deport them. This is not what this looks like at all. It looks like going after people that are defenseless, whether they're legals or illegals. And that has an economic impact in the ways I just mentioned and others.
Yeah, it seems like to me, my humble opinion is that there's the one game-changing macroeconomic policy we could implement is a rational immigration system. We need immigrants, of all skills, low, middle,
Yeah.
high. but we
Yeah.
get the right skill levels and allow those immigrants in the country. That's not only about labor supply, but it's also about labor productivity, because these folks, they're enterprising. They, you don't pick up and leave one country, come to another, unless you're a risk taker, and that's what you need to start companies and innovate and
Yeah.
everything else.
I agree.
Totally. Okay, I'm not going to end that way though, Alan. So just here's the opposite question. Lift us higher, please. What could go right that that we're not thinking about?
Well, inflation could resume its downward drip. It was going down, down, down slowly, and now lately it's going up, up, up again slowly. Wouldn't take too much to make that go down. That would be a good thing. And this AI phenomenon, at least in the near term, could turn out to be quite benign, raising productivity, which is a good supply shock.
Yep. Yep. All right. I feel a little bitty better. Yeah. But
Well, I'm glad for
yeah,
that.
I appreciate that though. And I really do want to thank you for spending time with us. Always learn a lot, and the conversation is always very engaging and thoughtful. So really do appreciate that. And hey guys, anything else
Thank you.
before we call it a podcast? Marissa, Dante, Chris, anything? No? Okay. All right. All right, Alan. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving and Christmas and the
And
holidays
same
and
to all of you.
all of that. And good luck with that, with those blue books, and the efforts to stop those kids from cheating. I have this image of you, Alan, with like a ruler sitting in the classroom. It's-
It's the opposite. At Princeton, we have an honor code. The professor's not allowed to be in there
Geez.
proctoring the
Okay,
exam.
there you go. Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Well,
Okay.
don't get into trouble, Alan, now.
Well, at my age, I can get into trouble.
Okay,
It's okay.
fair enough. Thank you so much. And with that, dear listener, we are going to call this a podcast. We'll talk to you next week. Take care now.